Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we're not going to be building a kit that comes in a box. In fact, we'll be building one of my own designs that I've 3D printed of the Zis-30 tank destroyer in 1/72 scale. So without further ado, let's get into it. For those unfamiliar with the questionableness that is the Zis-30, to make it you essentially take a T20 armoured artillery tractor and combine it with a Zis 257mm anti-tank cannon by slapping it onto the roof. I'd already designed both a T20 and the Zis 2 cannon, both of which are also available to download on my Cults page, so it wasn't really a massive task to combine the needed parts from these two files and add the extra add-on structures in Blender. I intended so you could build this kit in either the firing position or in a travel position, so to test it I decided to make one in each configuration. I sliced my files in Archie and then print them using my Anycubic 4K, and then I give them a wash in my wash and cure machine using some methylated spirits to clean the uncured resin from the parts. Before then beginning construction, I also washed the parts in some warm soapy water to help remove any residue and make the glue and paint stick better to the model. I started building the first Zis-30, beginning with the lower chassis by gluing the two side pieces together, which also include the running gear as one piece. This was glued to the bottom hull with some Deluxe Materials Rocket Odorless CA glue, and then I wound them tightly with some Tamiya masking tape to hold them together while the glue dried. In the meantime, I added the support arms to the rear plate for the hull in the retracted position. The cannon for the Zis 2 was test fitted by sliding the gun through the shield to line up a hole in the cannon with a small divot on the underside of the shield, before I then added the locking piece that goes on the front. I glued the wooden platforms to the upper hull in the stowed position and added both of the hatches to the front before gluing the upper and lower hull pieces together and adding the rear plate and forward machine gun bulge into place. I then glued the travel lock in the up position and glued the gun into place, attaching the rear travel lock and the stowage boxes to the rear. The front hull on my first prototype had warped a little bit, so it required some extra glue and a bit more pressure to help hold it together while I closed the gap. I then began to assemble the second Zis-30, starting once again with the lower hull. For the second vehicle, I added the upper hull on a bit sooner before adding the hatches, machine gun cover, the various stowages and the support arms. This time though, I glued the arms in their extended firing position to help stabilise the vehicle. I also glued the travel locks in their firing positions and the driver's hatch in the closed position. The wooden hatches were glued in their extended position so that the gunner and loader would have a place to stand while operating the cannon, and then the cannon itself was assembled, though I didn't glue it to the hull this time, instead using just a bit of blue tack to hold it in place to allow it to still freely rotate but still be relatively solid. Being a resin kit, imperfections and fit problems are pretty common, so I used a bit of Vallejo's water-based putty to fill in any of the gaps, the worst of them being between the upper and the lower hull, especially at the front. Overall, however, I was pretty happy with the fit, and most of the parts, other than some of the side skirts on the upper hull, had formed pretty well without too many imperfections. Once the putty was applied and the excess had been removed with a damp finger, I then left the models aside to dry before moving on to painting them. I decided to keep it simple and paint them in the uniform Soviet green using Vallejo's model colour 70924 Russian uniform green. This water-based acrylic paint was mixed with some water to help make it a little bit thinner, and then it was applied with a reasonably large brush over both of the models. Although painting by hand in thin layers is a bit time consuming, it helps to reduce the amount of brush strokes you end up with and preserve the details underneath. After 5 layers, the green was looking pretty nice and uniform, so I then moved on to painting the finer details. Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium was used to paint the tracks by carefully picking them out with a fine brush, and this was then followed with some Vallejo flat black to paint the rubber trim on the road and idler wheels, as well as some of the details on the cannon's control system and the visible gun sight. If I made any mistakes, I would later clean them up with the fine brush and some more of the Vallejo uniform green. A second coat of flat aluminium and also black was applied to the tracks, and once again I neatened up the mistakes with the green before getting the flat aluminium out once again, and using a dry brushing technique I created some metal chipping and scratches with it on all of the raised areas for both Zis-30s and their cannons. Once I'd applied the chipping, I then toned down the effect and created some more distressed paint effects by dabbing some of the uniform green around the edges of the larger chipped areas. This helps to not only reduce how much chipping there is, giving it a more subtle and realistic effect, but it also creates the illusion of a bit of a layering effect, making it look like the metal is underneath the paint and was scratched away. The platforms on the Zis-30 would have been made out of wood, so to create the scratches and a bit of a texture for them, I instead used some XF52 flat earth, which was applied thick on purpose to create some brush streaks, giving the illusion of a bit of wood graining. Once I'd applied the wooden scratches, I then waited for them to dry and gave the running gear a coat of Tamiya black panel liner to help highlight the details and make the tracks and the wheels look a little bit more dirty. The flat earth was then painted over scrappily in some areas with the uniform green to create the overlaying effect, and when I was happy with it, I then applied some black panel liner over the entirety of both of the models. The panel liner is very strong and makes the models a little bit too dark, so once it had dried, I then got out a cotton bud and dipped it in some enamel thinners, and then rubbed it gently over the model to remove the excess panel liner from the flat areas, making the model a bit lighter, but also creating a capillary effect that means the panel liner flows only into the recessed details, making sure they are still highlighted. The good news is, because I'd used water-based acrylics, the thinners don't interact with the paints I'd used, so they only affect the enamel thinners that I'd used for the panel liner. With most of the heavy handling of the model completed, I then added the finer details, such as the machine gun barrel, along with the spare track links and a spare road wheel for add-on details, which I have included as something you can print in this kit. The smaller details were painted either flat aluminium, uniform green, or a little bit of Vallejo flat black, and at the same time I also painted the inner part of the lights, which come fixed to the mudguards, with some Vallejo silver. The running gear then received some Vallejo wet mud and grass effects from an admittedly rather old and slightly dried up bottle to add a build-up of mud and grass fibres in the tracks and running gear from a bit of off-road driving. I then used my water-based Tamiya Weathering Master pigments to add some black soot on the cannon and machine guns, and I used a mixture of the various sand, brown and rust colours to add a variety of dirt effects on the lower sides of the hull and where the crew would walk on the rear deck, as well as in a streaking motion down the vertical surfaces on the vehicle and the cannon shield. Finally, after some more panel liner on the spare tracks and wheels, and an experimental dab of some crystal clear glue on the lights to add a glass effect, both of the Zis-30s were finally complete. And here you can see both of the finished tank destroyers. Being one of the more recent designs I'd made, I was pretty confident they would print successfully, and I'm very happy with these as first results. I did notice after having built both of these kits that I've actually installed the platforms the wrong way around, so when they're stored they should be able to fold and sit flush with the sides of the vehicle, rather than being up at a 90-degree angle, but this can easily be fixed at a later stage by just pulling them off and putting them on the right way. Another issue I had, which you'll see with the vehicle in the travelling position, is that the cannon barrels warp a fair bit when they cure. I have found that the solution is to keep them on the support frames and give them a little bit of extra time in the curing machine, which you'll notice managed to make the barrel nice and straight on my second Zis-30. Admittedly, they are rather fiddly kits, but most resin models are, and overall the fit of the parts was still pretty good, the details were great, and I hope many other people will find this a good kit and buy my files for this vehicle and make a couple for themselves. One day I would also like to sell these kits as they are with all the parts, but that is probably a project for another day. I'm looking forward to building a couple more of these kits, and perhaps one day also doing some stop motions featuring them. I also plan to share some more build videos on my other resin prints I've designed, including perhaps the 1/72nd scale T20 that this kit is based on, and my Gaz67 Jeep. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and also if you're interested in downloading the STL files and printing these yourselves, I'll leave a link in the description for where you can buy it from my Cults page. A big shout out to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund buying my model products that I use to make these kits, and also for buying the regular kits that I do my inbox reviews of and build reviews. Thanks once again for making it to the end of this video, and as always, Take care, and until the next one, model on.